So everybody, thanks so much for listening to the program. If you haven't subscribed to us on YouTube, definitely subscribe. Definitely subscribe to us on YouTube. Greatly appreciate your time. We have a special guest. Again, this man is a legend, not just on this program, but I believe all over the country. And people have to listen to what he has to say because he is preaching how we can get out of this mess that we've been in for over 30 years, probably more than that. And this is Professor Richard Wolff. He is the founder of Democracy at Work and also the host of Economic Update. Professor Wolff, thanks so much for your time again. Appreciate it.
Well, Bob, it's a pleasure to be here and to talk with you about these things.
All right. So you did just put a book out at the end of August. Before we even get into what's going on in the Biden administration and the economic crisis in our country, let's talk about the book quickly. Now, the book is called The Sickness is the System. Can you talk about the book and what made you want to write it?
Yeah, the year 2020 will, of course, go down in history because of this spectacular collapse of public health. There's no other nice way to put it. We as a society were unprepared when it hit us in March of this year. We should have been prepared. Viruses are nothing new. We had a horrific one back in 1918, a century ago, that killed 700,000 Americans. We know very well what they can do. In recent years, we've had SARS and MERS and Ebola and all the rest. There's no excuse for an economy being unprepared, but we were. And now we have made it worse by being unable to contain the virus after having been unprepared for it. But here's the irony that made me title the book the way I did. I think the much deeper sickness is the economic system we are allowing to continue long beyond its time. It isn't good for the vast majority of people. The folks getting rich off of it were always a minority, and they are now a very small minority. I mean, I could give you a million examples, but most of you know that. Just to give you one, over the last 9 months, when Americans have been dying and getting sick at record numbers, the richest people in America became richer. Jeffrey Bezos, just to pick him out, goes from $120 billion, which is already crazy, to now over $200 billion. I mean, while people are impoverished by being unemployed, by being unable to pay their rents or keep up their mortgages, other people who are already the richest in the world are becoming richer. No morality I'm aware of, no religion I'm aware of would look upon that as an acceptable ethical proposition. And yet we seem like we're zombies. We don't do much. We don't react. We watch this horror unfold. So I wanted to write a book that said, hey, look, we're going to get through this medical disaster eventually, whether it's herd immunity or it's vaccines or whatever. But we're not going to get through this economic crisis, this capitalism, unless we understand that that's the bottom line. It was because it wasn't profitable for the producers of masks to produce them and warehouse them and maintain them and clean them. That's why we know how to produce masks. We're not a country that can't do that. We chose, our private profit-driven companies chose, by the way, which I understand. Who in their right mind is going to make a mask? Costs money. Put it in a warehouse? Costs money. Monitor it, clean it, protect it, repair it, replace it, waiting an unknown number of years until the virus comes. That's too risky. That's too unprofitable. But that leads you to a conclusion you cannot escape. Capitalism and public health don't work together. If you want public health, you can't leave it in the hands of private capitalists. We did that, and look at the price that we are paying. So I wanted people to get that the real sickness that they've got to worry about now is the economic system, not the particular medical emergency we have.
Well, you did bring up Jeffrey Bezos, and he's about to become a trillionaire fairly soon. He's on his way with that. And we talk about all the small businesses that closed down. In the CARES Act, people like Tom Brady, Floyd Mayweather, these sports stars, these millionaires, billionaires they're close to, were getting tons of money for businesses that they operated, small businesses. But the regular mom and pop stores were not getting any of this money. So, and you talked about, like I said, Bezos cleaning up. So what are we going to look to for small businesses right now that are going out of business like crazy right now? And these businesses are not going to come back. Meanwhile, Bezos and the rich people that are on Wall Street and the richest among us are really cleaning up like clockwork here. And there's no crisis with them. There might be a little bit of a health crisis that they have to worry about. But other than that, they don't really give a damn about anything going on. So what's your opinion on that?
Well, let me give you two pieces of information that came out this week. One was an article in the New York Times, and the other one was a report from the state of New Jersey. Right. Let me give you the New Jersey example first. New Jersey is a very densely populated state. Right. The report came out that one third of small and medium-sized businesses in New Jersey over the last 9 months since March of this year, one third of those businesses have closed permanently. That is, these are businesses that are not coming back. They're selling off their equipment, they're canceling their insurance policies, they're doing all the things you do when the business is over. One third. My second example, New York Times article this week indicates that on the payroll protection program that was passed by Congress, early in the pandemic, a total of $523 billion were given out in forgivable loans. In other words, you got a loan, but you don't have to pay it back. Okay, 5.2 million businesses received some money. But here's what the New York Times article shows. 1% of those businesses, the biggest 1%, collected, ready, 25% of that money. And it gives examples of these huge corporations that were able to manipulate a program. For me, that's a sign of the sickness of capitalism. It's a system that makes a few people very rich. Then the system crashes like it did this year, and we use taxpayer money. And who gets the bulk of it? The same super rich. It's as if perversity reproduces itself over time. And of course, the little ones are worse hit. They have the least resources. They have the least pull with the politicians. So they're the most vulnerable. And now you give them the least relief. I mean, it really is too much. I can imagine the mom and pop who built a little business over the years, basically throwing up their hands. You've created too many obstacles. But it's not politicians so much as it is the structure of a capitalism that allows so few companies to have such an outsized influence.
But Professor Wolff, would you go back and to say that this is an issue with the Democratic Party? We go back to the CARES Act. The corporations wanted their $5 trillion. They wanted that cash on hand. The Democrats had this by the balls. They could have said, listen, and this is the progressive people in the Democratic Party, Bernie Sanders, AOC, Rashida Tlaib, and the list goes on and on of those progressives in the squad too. Could have said, hey, we are not voting for this bill. And Nancy Pelosi should have said, I am not voting for this bill and bringing it to the floor. If you guys don't put a UBI, Medicare for all, and something to do with mortgage assistance, rental assistance and stuff, they did nothing. She piled down and bowed down to the establishment and to the Wall Street and all these other people and did nothing, gave them whatever they wanted. And now they can't do anything. So what do you think about that? I believe that it was Nancy Pelosi's fault and the Democrats in Congress that they did not do anything.
Absolutely. I could not agree with you more. I mean, it boggles my mind.
Right.
Just to give you another dimension of it, almost all of the 50 states and the federal government declared what they call an eviction moratorium, not just for residential families to not pay their rent, but also commercial. It's called a commercial eviction ban. So that if you're a store in a mall someplace, but you can't make your monthly payment to the mall landlord, okay, all of those were not forgiven. You just can't be evicted. But those rents that you didn't pay starting in April, they have mounted. However many months you didn't pay, you now owe, plus interest, plus penalties, and it's all going to come due the last day of this month. They all basically come due on the 34th. There's no way millions of these families are going to come up with multiple months of rent. There's no way stores that have been closed for most of the last 9 months are going to come up with multiple months. So what are you going to do? Throw millions of people onto the slag heap of homelessness at a time when you tell people that the way you avoid the disease is stay inside, have social distance, wash your hands. You can't do that if you don't have a place to live. I mean, it is so crazy and so destructive that it has forced economists like me to begin to ask the question we never thought we would ask. Is this system collapsing? Right. Is capitalism over? And the answer at this point is, I don't know. I'm not going to tell you it is, but I cannot, in all honesty, tell you it isn't. And that's an amazing place to have come to at this point. And when we see other capitalist countries, like the People's Republic of China, doing so much better. They handled the virus better. They contained it better. Their economy is growing this year. Ours is shrinking. I mean, you're stuck with a question, oh my God, have we missed that we've passed the peak and we're on the downhill side of this mountain?
Well, Professor Wolff, we call this such a, all these Republicans, I should say, call us a Christian nation. Meanwhile, they're cutting people's benefits at Christmas the day after and then throwing people out of their houses. I know there's people here in Florida, in Tampa, they just did an article in the Tampa Bay Times that people have been getting thrown out of their houses even before that eviction moratorium's up. So it's, it's even the rubber's already meeting the road for these people that are already getting thrown out. So it's really a disaster that this is going on. So my question is for that is, we do have that Senate election on January 5th in Georgia, which will decide the Senate. The Republicans will probably win that. But what should the new government, the Biden administration, do when they get into power on January 20th to help people get out of this rut?
Well, let me first respond to what you read in the Tampa Bay, in the newspaper. Right. There. That's quite correct, because the ban on eviction was written in a very narrow way. You cannot be evicted for failing to pay your rent. So a landlord that wants to get you out because you're not paying your rent can still try to do that by claiming you didn't maintain the garden properly, or you damaged the toilet, or, in other words, if he can come up with another reason, he can evict you. You're not protected. I mean, crazy to have done that, right? It's like an invitation and an incentive to every landlord to pull a stunt like that. And that's why you're reading about people who are getting evicted because the landlords figured this out. Here's my take on the new economic team. And let me explain that I know one of them, Janet Yellen. I think I told you about it once before. She and I were classmates at Yale University at the same time. We had the same professors. We got the same PhD degree. We took the same courses. We had the same curriculum. Nothing in that curriculum ever instructed us on problems of capitalism, failures of capitalism, breakdowns of capitalism. We never learned, what do you do when that happens? What works? What doesn't work? There were once courses in America about the business cycle where you would study past crises and what was done in them. But the ideology of the Cold War was we don't have crises anymore. Crazy. But so we didn't study them anymore. And so she's not equipped. It's not even her fault. She's not equipped. And I look at the rest of the team, and you know what comes to my mind? The phrase, same old, same old. These are people who have been sitting at the top of our economic system all of their lives. Many of them were one kind or another of advisor in the Obama administration. These are people who have told us their goal is to go back to normal, by which they seem to mean pre-Trump normal. And my reaction to that is to shake my head in utter disbelief. And here's why. One, we are in the worst condition of the American economy in my lifetime. And that means, since I got white hair, the lifetime of all of those other people. This is not the time to go back to anything we did before. This is a time to break new ground because we got a way worse problem to deal with. We better come up with a way bigger solution, or else we're wasting everybody's time, number one. Number two, it was the normal before Trump that paved the way for Trump. He just rode in because what? Because working people were not secure in their jobs, because incomes hadn't risen, because the level of debt that people were carrying was way too much. If you add the mortgage to the car payments, to the credit card, and now the new one, the college student debt, it's too much. It's just too, you can't do that. And the people were angry and bitter and upset. They didn't want the normal because that's how they got there. So they voted in many cases for Donald Trump just because he was obviously different. He wasn't like these other politicians. If he had been like them, he wouldn't have won. That's why he captured, he took away from Jeb Bush to be the candidate of the Republicans, and then he defeated Mrs. Clinton and all that, because those are all the old Bush and Clinton. That's what got us here. And and I look at this team and I say, oh my God, he's gonna do it again. He's gonna do another Obama,
and we're gonna get a worse Trump, Professor Wolff. Sorry to interrupt you. We will get a worse Trump, I believe.
Yes, I think so too. By worse, though, I mean I think he'll be worse in what he does or she does. But they'll be smart enough to learn not to do the things that cost Trump. Don't be crazy about immigrants. Don't be a racist. Don't talk about women's anatomy. Don't do that. And, they'll find someone who will be a lot more polished, a lot smoother, and then he or she will walk away with it because the Democrats have made so many people upset by not solving this problem. Mr. Trump is clever. He's leaving an economic disaster for Mr. Biden. And Mr. Biden looks with his team like they're going to be doing way too little and way too late.
Well, my thing is, can we look at Mr. Biden's economic team quickly? I know you spoke about Janet Yellen a little bit, right, and what happened with her. But let's talk about these other people that are going to be involved in the economic team. We look at Neera Tanden, how she was against Bernie Sanders. She, definitely hates progressives. I believe that she's unqualified for the OMB director position. She's against Medicare for all. She's for cutting Social Security and Medicare. They also have an African-American guy. I'm not good at pronouncing his name, but he was in the Obama administration too. He fought for the TPP, and he worked at BlackRock, and another BlackRock guy is the leader of the Economic Council in Brian Deese. So we have people that are literally on Wall Street running places like BlackRock, which have been a travesty to this country for years upon years on end, and they're going to be running the Biden administration. So yes, nothing will fundamentally change. Can you talk about some of those other people, especially these guys that are working at BlackRock? It just seems like it's identity politics 101. We'll bring in a woman, but they're not going to help working people. They're just going to be corporate shills. We'll bring in a black guy. We'll bring in a Hispanic guy. We'll bring in this guy or this woman, but they're just corporate shills.
Well, that's what the two political parties do. Each
Yeah.
of them depends on money from corporations. Each of them depends on money from rich people, the establishments in any case. And then the job of the party is to take all that money they get from the corporations to keep the system going, because that's what the corporations want. And now they have to go out and scrounge the votes. The Republicans scrounge votes from working class people whom they can convince to vote Republican because the Republicans are enthusiastic about evangelical Christians, or they're enthusiastic about having a rack of guns in the back of your pickup truck, or that you won't allow abortion, or that, all of that stuff. And the Democrats, they do the same thing, except they go after different groups. They give the Republicans the evangelicals, they can't make any headway, but they get the minorities, they get the brown and black people disproportionately, or the females, or at least the younger single females, et cetera, et cetera. So each of them has their portions of the mass of the people that they gather. And then the name of the game is, when you add up the evangelicals and the racists and the gun nuts and all the rest of it, is that more people, more votes than the black, the brown, the women, the progressives, that kind of thing? This is crazy politics. This has nothing to do, because whichever one wins, it's the corporations who provide the money to the party, both parties. BlackRock is a wonderful example. BlackRock is what funded the globalization that moved jobs out of the country. BlackRock is the organization that funds the automation that replaces people with machines and doesn't care what happens to the community. I was born in Youngstown, Ohio. It was a thriving steel making place when I was born there. Today, it's a ghost town. It's a place where you look at empty factories because nothing ever came to replace it. This is irrational. This makes no sense. This couldn't have been done by anybody who cared about what happened to people. And I think what you have is a political vacuum. And my hope, that's all it is. My hope is that at some point, all of those of us who can see what's going on, coupled with the Bernies and the AOCs and the others, they'll withdraw, and we'll finally have some real political choice. We'll have Republicans and Democrats who think capitalism is the greatest thing since sliced bread, but there'll be another political party says, hey, we can do better than that system, and here's how we're going to do it. We're going to have Medicare for all. We're going to take care of people. We're going to make this a place where you're not going to have to sweat if you get sick, that you can cover your expense. All of that, we're going to do that. And if you believe in that, if you want a country that has those things, you vote for us.
But don't the Democrats get that people don't really give a damn about identity politics? That's why we saw young black people, young Hispanic people, young white people vote for Bernie Sanders in 2016, especially in droves over the identity politics candidate of Hillary Clinton. It seems like they don't get it. People want affordable health care, a good job that pays well, and affordable housing. It just seems like they don't understand it. I don't understand how they do not understand it after 2016, after 2020.
Well, there I think, Bob, the key role to be played is by people like you. Yeah. You have a media that are themselves big businesses. Most of the media in this country, the mainstream media, are half a dozen very, very large corporations. You know them, I know them, we all know them. They're big capitalist corporations. They're not going to be in the business of criticizing or exposing alternatives to great big capitalist businesses, because that's what they are. So what you do is you need the internet, which we now have, so that people like you and me and others are able to develop ways of getting an alternative message. I think the audience for that message is there. I think the American people are very upset. There would not have been a chance for a character like Trump if they hadn't been. And I think that upset is real and is justified, but has gone in the direction that it went because those of us on the left have not yet made the pitch that I think if we do, the audience will respond.
I just have three more quick questions. I do appreciate your time, Professor Wolff. Let's talk about the crisis, and you brought this up in the last answer in the Democratic caucus. We have people like Bernie Sanders, AOC, and the rest of the gang that are fighting clearly for the middle class, and the other half of the Democratic caucus is fighting for Wall Street and the suburbs. And we saw that in election 2020, where white suburban voters, men and women, were the reason why Joe Biden won the presidency in all these states that he did win. So with
Right.
that said, do you really feel like this is a breaking point? I know you, like I said, you brought it up in the last answer about a third party. How can we get this third party when it's so hard to get on the ballot on certain states? You have to raise so much money, and then you have to get that notoriety, which the Democrats and the Republicans do have on lock because of the money they get from the corporations.
Well, here's my answer. The Republicans and Democrats should have surprised no one when they agreed to make it difficult for anyone else to break into their monopoly. Americans are supposed to be against monopoly. We're not supposed to allow one or two companies to dominate, whether it's the automobile industry or the electric industry or anything else. We've allowed a monopoly to be operated by these two political parties. My view is, if you can get a determined group of people, and we have more than enough of them in this country, to begin to say, okay, we are an alternative, to attack the Republicans and Democrats for the monopoly that they have abused. I think that the basis of an alternative has never been stronger in my lifetime than it is right this minute. Will it have obstacles? You bet. Is the deck stacked against the third party? You bet. There will be problems. But I have the feeling that my reading of where people are at, coupled together with the reality that Bernie, who started out as a candidate with nothing going for him, except the bad news that he was a socialist and didn't run away from the title, he proved that he could get millions of Americans to send him $20. And that with the millions, even though what each one of them gave was small, you added up a big budget that would allow him to become as well known as he now is. This is a sign that even the monetary problem can be solved. And I think if you put together the crisis of capitalism, the failure of the two big parties, the monopoly that we can expose them to be operating, we've got a very strong set of foundations to build on.
Well, it's funny you brought up the socialist mantra and Bernie running on that, not running away from it. But it's hilarious because we saw in 2020 that all the Democrats lost tons of seats in the House, and they were running away from Medicare for All, a Green New Deal, and all these other progressive policies, and they lost. And the people that ran for those policies, they all won, whether they are in Congress, in the U.S. Senate. So it's funny how that trickled down. I also think, and I want to get your take on this quick, the $1.8 trillion that President Trump wanted before the election, which Democrats stood against. Nancy Pelosi said she was not going to give Trump a win before the election, when people's lives were hanging in the balance that needed that stimulus money, that $400 or $500 checks, whatever it was that Trump put on there with the $1,200 check. People needed that money to survive. Nancy Pelosi saying that she couldn't give Trump a win. That's why, another reason why I believe Democrats lost. Do you agree with those statements?
Absolutely. I think these are the political games that those people have always played. They didn't want to have the big relief in time for the election because the Democrats, because they understood that if everybody got a check in, I don't know, in September or October, Mr. Trump would claim that he delivered it and ask people to vote for him. And now the shoe is on the other foot. Now the Democrats are coming in, so Mr. McConnell is not going to give them, if he can avoid it, a chance to send a check right after the inauguration, because it'll look, even though it isn't true, it'll look like the new government is delivering to you so they're playing the convention. That's what I keep telling people. They're playing conventional games, but we're not in a conventional situation. We're in a deep crisis. Look, Capitalism would have had a hard time with the crash this year if it was just a crash.
Right.
And capitalism would have had a hard time if it was just a terrible virus. But it is the worst nightmare of capitalism to have one of its crashes happening in the same time, in the same place as a public health disaster. And that means we are in uncharted territory. The Great Depression of the 1930s had no virus. It just had a capitalist crash. This is a qualitatively different situation, and you can't play stale old politics and think you're going to be adequate to what we've got now.
So as we end, the vaccine is coming out in Britain. It's supposed to come out this week from what I hear on CNN. So how do you feel that will affect the recovery? Obviously, it's in Britain, but it's going to come out here fairly soon. And what will that do to the economy as far as a prediction with the vaccine coming out and people getting it throughout 2021?
There's no way to know at this point. For example, we don't know enough about this vaccine. It takes a while to understand what are the side effects. Some of them show up soon, some of them show up later. Millions of Americans or British are not going to take a vaccine whose side effects we don't know about. So we're not going to have a thoroughly vaccinated population for at least another year or more, which means that the immediate effect on the economy will be very unknowable, mixed at best. I don't think it's the game changer that people hope and want it to be. Meanwhile, at least in the United States, the disease is utterly out of control. And that will be the more dominant shaper of what happens to us than speculations about who will get a virus that works how well into the future. So that would be my take.
I agree. I'm not going to get the vaccine until I know fully what the side effects are. Anybody that does that is kind of a little silly because you don't know what you're putting in your body. And I'm all for vaccines. I'm not one of those anti-vaxxers.
Right. But you really do have to be careful before you do something which may end up being more dangerous for your well-being than the thing it's against.
Agreed. So last question as we end the interview. Can you give young people and progressives such as myself some hope? They're losing their jobs. Their hours are cut if they're even still working. They're losing their homes, their health care if they haven't already. While, as we've talked about throughout the interview, Washington is doing a rerun of the Obama administration. As you said, to quote you, the same old people in Washington. So how can we have hope through, it seems like the United States is in a crisis disaster?
Well, the hope that we have is the hope you always can have, that it's darkest in the nighttime before the dawn comes.
Yeah.
I think we're going through a crisis that is teaching particularly young people a very crucial lesson. Your problems, your inability to pay for college, your lack of a job, you're getting a job and discovering that the income is not enough to function and to have a life, let alone to get married, let alone to think about a family and all the other parts of a normal life. That these are not your personal problem. This isn't about you didn't take the right course or you didn't go to the right school or you did. No, you're seeing around you millions of people who are suffering just like you are. This is a social problem, not a personal one. That's an enormous advance over the previous generation. And the second comes right from the first. You don't solve a social problem with an individual solution. You can't. You have to recognize it's not an individual problem, and therefore your solution isn't you do this thing, you do that. No, your solution is to form a social movement, because that's how you solve social problems. That's why you need the Bernies, the AOCs. Those have to, millions of them have to come forward. Those are just two people, one old guy from Vermont, one young dynamic woman from Queens. But there are loads of these sorts of people, and they have to come together and learn. We are the generation that's going to make a social movement to change it. I think millions of young people are figuring that out. And that's my biggest hope for what the future can bring.
And thank you for saying that as we end, because a lot of people say, how come you don't have a good job? How come you're not married? How come you don't have kids? Because we can't afford it, because you got to think smart. You got to be conservative with your money right now, because you don't know where that income is going to come from right now. So, I mean, what's true is true. A lot of people don't think like that. I know a lot of people that say those things. So I do appreciate that. So as we end, and Professor Wolff is an amazing man. Definitely go on and look for him on again, Democracy at Work. He's the host of Economic Update. It's on YouTube. I watch it. I subscribe to it. Definitely subscribe to it. Professor Wolff, thanks so much for coming on. But where can people find your book and buy it?
Easiest is to go to our website, democracyatwork.info. That's all one word, democracyatwork.info. All the stuff about all our books and everything is right there. You can order them. You can learn about them. It's very simple.
You're an American treasure, Professor Wolff. Thanks so much. I love this. I enjoy it. And if I would love to have you. You are a teacher to me, even though we only talk for 30 some odd minutes, but I love talking to you.